Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Rakesh Shah. He's a radiologist. Today's Kevin MD article is A Critique of Medicine's Response to RFK Jr. Rakesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
All right. So let's start by briefly sharing your story and journey.
So I've been a radiologist for 30 years, and my main focus, of course, has been the practice of radiology, but I'm also very interested in politics, economics, how what happens in DC affects healthcare, and conversely, how we in healthcare can influence policy.
All right. So, of course, let's talk about RFK Jr. You wrote a critique of organized medicine's response to him. Tell us what led you to write this article and then talk about the article itself for those who didn't get a chance to read it.
Well, basically, I was very surprised, shocked and surprised, as many people were, when at the time of confirmation, not every doctor, but by the vast majority of doctors, most major organizations were kind of silent. There were a number of reasons and excuses I've heard for this, but I was very surprised, given his past views, given what he said, that there was not more organized resistance to his confirmation. We can go to some of the reasons why I think that happened, but I was really quite outraged, and to me, it epitomizes how doctors have basically lost leverage or kind of sway in the political world, even when we have such a clear, in my opinion, someone clearly unsuitable for the job as RFK Jr.
So, at the time of his confirmation, why do you think that organized medicine stayed silent?
Well, I think there were three reasons. One is I think we were some people assumed he wouldn't get in, which I think is kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that he's not gonna get in. Let's just not rock the boat. The third reason is that I think there was a feeling, well, if he gets in, let's not create an enemy. So I think there was a feeling, well, they seem to be approving every nominee, so let's just let him in and let's not pick a fight with someone who's going to have power over us. And the third reason, I think, the most biggest mistake was the idea there'll be adults in charge. Basically, we thought, well, yeah, he's a little bit, wacky, but there are enough adults in the room that they'll keep him in check. A lot of people say things in the campaign trail when they're, before they're in office, they come in, they moderate. I would argue it's been the opposite direction. Things, in my opinion, have gotten worse than what I expected. But I think there was a hope in some people's mind that maybe, maybe that was just for show at the time. Maybe there are enough adults in the room. It turns out he fired the adults. It turns out, I think in my mind, things got worse than what I expected because he fired the adults. The guardrails were demolished. So I think those were three reasons I gave. I think we were silent, but I think they're all flawed reasons.
So now I hear that some organized medical societies are calling for his removal. Is that a little bit too late? What's your opinion on
Yeah.
some of their actions now calling for his removal?
Right. I give a lot of credit to the ACP organizations. There has been actually a pretty strong pushback. Just as I wrote my article, in fact, 6 surgeon generals, thousands of doctors. The pushback at this point is actually quite strong, but it's too little too late. Trump never backs down. I don't want to get too political, but he's not about to back down from his previous nominee. In fact, he's doubled down on things like Tylenol and stuff, which I think most doctors think are just at best questionable, if not completely wrong. I think the most vulnerable point was at the confirmation. There were several, senators, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins, who might have been persuadable. That was the point of weakness. Once someone's in a job, especially, with the current administration, it's extraordinarily difficult to get them to relinquish power. And I think that was a huge tactical mistake, strategic error on behalf of medicine, to wait to see what happens and then try to get him out.
So there are a lot of physicians who supported and continue to support RFK Jr. What kind of message do you have for our physician colleagues who continue to support RFK and his agenda?
Well, first of all, like I said, a broken clock is right twice a day. There's some things about him which I think most doctors will agree with. Processed foods, chronic health. I mean, there are a couple of things. One of the reasons why he's gained some traction, he's touched on nerve with a lot of people, a lot of physicians about things that, I think are valid. I think chronic illness is a concern. I think processed foods are an issue. We shouldn't have fake dyes in our food. So I think some of that may do that. Some of this maybe I think a feeling that there's some people, not including doctors, just are fine just breaking the whole house down. They're fine with a bull in a china shop. So they feel the house is broken. It's okay. Let this guy tear it up because it's not working for me, And, and I think the biggest critique I have, if you genuinely believe RFK is best for patients, that's fine. My issue is when doctors, some of them feel, well, I know he's kind of crazy, but, I like the administration and I think they're on my side. And I think that's what I find very objectionable, because if you think they're helping patients, but they're helping you, that's where I think I really have a real objection with that.
In your piece, you wrote that it's not just about childhood vaccines, but the future of mRNA research and the implications for things outside of autism, like cancer. So,
Right.
how do you feel like anti-vaccine rhetoric is directly threatening oncology?
It's huge. I'm not a cancer expert, and we don't know at this point what the promises of these vaccines. But my understanding of people I talk to is quite promising. And I think there was quite a substantial amount of exciting research going on in this area. A lot of oncologists are very excited about it. mRNA, of course, was how we turned tide to COVID. There's tremendous possibility here. And it's funny. It's one thing not fight the war on cancer. This administration is actually trying to lose the war on cancer. I mean, we have one of the most promising technologies that I know in recent memory, and we're actually not even funding. In fact, we're going the opposite direction. And I think it's very chilling to research in the field, to all cancer research, I think. And I think the implications, it's hard to reverse this damage. You can't just come in 3 years, okay, new guys in town, we're going to change, we're going to refund it. Once you lose ground and lose road, it's very hard to get back to it. And the amount of money that's been taken away, again, as a theoretical loss, we don't know what it would have been. I think it's catastrophic. I think most people who I've talked to in the sphere are really quite disturbed, but again, not so disturbed they're going to lobby as hard as should to get rid of RFK Jr., but they're very quite disturbed by the mRNA research, and that these promising technologies and science is just being tossed aside.
What do you think about the trust that we have in our public health authorities now that public health and the CDC, it's essentially become politicized? So going forward, even after the tenure of RFK Jr., what kind of damage do you think that's being done to our public health institutions?
I think there's tremendous damage, and I think it's going to take a long time, if ever, to recover. I'm not saying things were perfect before. I think that a COVID vaccine, it may have been undeserved, but I think a lot of our institutions were a little threatened. A lot of people felt maybe we swung too far with COVID. So I think there was some stress, to be fair, even before RFK Jr. There were those who felt in this country, and I'm not defending them, that the government was spreading false information about vaccines, COVID. I think there were some minor cracks in the ship before RFK Jr. But I think at this point, if you are a patient looking for accurate information, you're kind of in a wilderness here. You have the CDC saying one thing. One interesting development just in the last few weeks is that we have kind of an altered path of doctors, groups kind of doing their own vaccine recommendations, doing their own guidelines, because RFK does not seem to be going away. So you have at the ID week, I think last week, people coming up with their own guidelines. You kind of have these workarounds, which is interesting. So I find it very intriguing that rather than not trying to take the guy out, now you have a workaround. They say, oh, forget that guy. Here's our thing. And that may work for the short term. Over the long term, it creates a two-track thing where you have blue states and red states doing one thing. And basically, who you trust will depend on your political persuasion and who you follow, And I think it creates a really, really bad situation where we're questioning actual facts. We're not even debating, what the best treatment is. We're basically, it's okay to have different opinions. We can have different facts. And I think we're entering a world now where people are going to have a whole different set of facts based on who to listen to. And that's very dangerous. I think it's the erosion of trust. When we have next public health crisis, if people can't trust the authorities, it's going to be a massive catastrophe.
A lot of medical groups would argue that they have to stay apolitical to protect their scientific credibility. So what's your response to that specific defense?
Well, and then I would ask them, again, what is your exact role? I can understand the idea to maybe have a big tent, to let people, have all, let's be honest, most doctors, many doctors at least, voted for the current administration. It's not as if we're monolithic in our political views. So I can certainly understand if you're in a room with 100 positions, how you may not want to rock the boat. But we have to stand for something. And when it's something that even most doctors know is clearly against public health will, to not rock the boat, to say, well, we can't be political, then why are you here? If you're not going to engage in a clear threat, even if it involves engaging politics, in my opinion, you're irrelevant. And I think to be honest with you, as at the current point, I think 1 in 6 doctors are part of AMA. I don't think, we've done a good job in making doctors feel that there's anyone advocating for public health or for them. So I think we have to engage in the political sphere. Otherwise, we're largely irrelevant.
So when you talk about this critique to your fellow physician colleagues, in general, what has their reaction been? Are they in agreement? Do some of them defend the medical organizations? Just give us a spectrum of responses. Yes, it's
funny. I have some friends. I don't want to use his name. I have a friend who's very active in the AAP, and he's a good friend of mine. He goes, "What were you guys thinking? How could you say nothing?" And his goes, "Well, first of all, we didn't think he would get in, like I said. So there was a feeling, well, he's not going to get in. Then there was a feeling, well, if he gets in, why rock the boat?" And then the third is, well, now what can we do? I think that's one critique I have. The other critique I have, I don't think anyone defends him. And I think a lot of my colleagues, quite frankly, thought this wouldn't be the way it went. They go, well, we knew it was a little crazy, but we thought there'd be enough guardrails. We didn't think he'd go up Tylenol. We didn't think he would, some of the, I mean, there's stuff coming out now. I don't want to go details that go well beyond anything he's ever said. I mean, the war on Tylenol is particularly absurd. So I think I can't find anyone at this point, at least in my personal sphere, who defends him. But some of them like, yeah, well, people will know where to go for the right answers. But again, maybe you and I will, but a lot of the public will not.
Physicians in general traditionally have been taught to stay relatively apolitical, right? They don't want to alienate half of the patients that they see ideologically, right? So now, how do you get doctors to become more politically active, right? Because they've been trained to kind of stay out of the fray of politics for so long.
Right. No, I agree. I think that there's almost, especially the current arena, almost a fear. We have a very polarized country. Half our patients are one, depending on where you live, half, more than half of one persuasion the other, and half are more doctors. Let's be honest. When I go to doctor's lounge, there's a wide range of political opinions. It's a war between MSNBC and Fox News. We're not monolithic even in our own specialty. But again, I really think that we have to take the chance of putting our neck out, even if it's unpopular, even if there's a personal and even physical risk to ourselves, because there are major public health issues at risk. I can understand being apolitical when it comes to foreign policy or Palestine or things like that. When people's lives are on the line and we are in the business of public health, of saving lives, that's when we have to kind of cross that barrier and say, listen, I'm normally apolitical, but this is too important not to speak up.
So, what kind of advice do you have for physicians, maybe outside your own personal political sphere, in order for them to perhaps speak up about some of the things they're seeing? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Right. Now, first of all, I think people I need to speak up in general. We've reached the era where I think people are afraid. I'll be honest with you. I wrote my piece. I mentioned my wife, and he goes, "Well, make sure no one doxes you, or make sure no one comes after you." This is the world we live in now because we're just too afraid to speak up. Politically, we're very polarized. My advice is number one, don't be afraid to speak up. There's strength in numbers. And number two, we have to organize as a whole society, a whole medical profession. I'm a radiologist. I'm active in my society. There's really at this point, and I don't want to take a swipe at AMA, but there's no society that puts all the doctors together and say, this is what we stand for. Again, 1 in 6 doctors are part of the AMA. In my point, they're either unwilling or unable to advocate as a group for all positions. So we need to both step up and find a way to come together across specialties and say, this is what we believe in, because that's not happening now. At this point, we're like a balkanized specialty where everyone's looking out for themselves, and really all major public health issues left by the wayside. So my advice is speak up, unite, and tell your patients, you don't have to be political, tell your patients the truth. Vaccines are not dangerous. Tylenol, from what I understand, doesn't cause autism. So I think we should not be afraid to speak the truth to our patients, even if that's not what we're hearing.
Now, how realistic is that? Because you said yourself that physicians' ideologies, they're not monolithic. How realistic is it to have a single organization unite all doctors and speak with a single voice?
Well, I don't know if it's every doctor, but at this point, you don't even have 20% of doctors. So I think there's strength in numbers, and at this point, again, I give the HCP credit. That's a big block of doctors, but you have a lot of doctors out there who are not using the clout they have, and even vote. Yes, you can be a Republican, but maybe you can say, listen, if you don't get this guy, you can tell your senator, if this guy doesn't get out, I'm not voting for you next time. I'm not giving you money. We're not going to that level. I think this is a kind of threat where we have to go to the mat. If you're a Republican, and I have many colleagues who are, and maybe you are as well, say, listen, I'm not going to vote for you next time. Tell your son, I'm not voting for you unless you get this guy out. And no one has gone to the mat for that. So I really think there's kind of this feeling, yeah, we don't like him, but no one is actually willing to go to the mat for it. And I think you have to stick your neck out in certain circumstances.
We're talking to Rakesh Shah. He's a radiologist. Today's Kevin MD article is A Critique of Medicine's Response to RFK Jr. Rakesh, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Well, number one, like I said, we have to be vocalized. I think in the polarized country, we have to be vocal in defense of our patients. So I understand that sometimes that's difficult. We have to be vocalized. And the other take-home point is we have to be proactive and not reactive. I think with RFK Jr., we were kind of not proactive. We said, yeah, we'll see what happens. I think the current political climate and in life in general, we have to play a very proactive role in patients' health and not a reactive one. And like I mentioned, once he was confirmed, it was too late. So I think our role, my message to all doctors is speak up and let's be proactive. Let's not let this happen again. Let's work together as a group whenever public health arises to really make sure we're not only looking out for ourselves, but our patients as well.
Rakesh, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.